Hello students, this is Professor Venkatachalapathi, Institute of Aeronautical Engineering. I would like to discuss on recovery, recrystallization and grain growth in a metal forming. Dear students, in a manufacturing process, it comes under the second year, second semester for the mechanical engineering students. So in this manufacturing process, we have studied metal casting process, fabrication, welding process, and third unit which consisting of a metal forming process. Metal forming, the term metal forming can be defined as it is the process where you can achieve the mechanical properties like physical, electrical and magnetic properties, and we are supposed to minimize the material. So the wastage of material is negligible. That is called the metal forming process. Today I am going to tell about the recovery, recrystallization and grain growth. So let us see the basic introduction about this mechanical properties and how the temperature will varies. What about the structural changes in the various materials such as ferrous, non-ferrous and ceramic materials. This diagram clearly understand that the basic concept of the recovery, recrystallization and grain growth. Let us see how do you introduce the technical term called cold work. So this is one interesting in a metal forming process. So mainly depends upon the hot working and cold working. As you know that the term hot working can be defined as it is the process of heating the metals above its recrystallization temperature. So that means that is called hot working. The heating the metals below its recrystallization temperature, or we can say that it is at normal room temperature. That is called cold work. So here why this cold work is a very important technical term in the metal forming process. It is the mainly working definition of a cold work. In general, there is a heating the metal. What will happen? The plastic deformation occur, and whenever it changes its temperature. So there are two type of process. One is hot working and another one is cold working. In between, that melting temperature is 1 by 2, 1 by 3 to 1 by 2. That is 30% to the 50% of melting temperature. We will call it as a warm working. We can say that it is a warm working. So when you are speaking about the metal forming process, mainly the two terms are very important. One is the hot working process and second one is the cold working process. The hot working means it is heating the metals above its recrystallization temperature. We can call it as a hot working. Below its recrystallization or at room temperature, we call it as a cold working. And in between, that is when melting temperature is 1/3 to 1 by 2, that is 30% to the 50% of the melting temperature. We will call it as a warm working. This is called warm working. So it is a important terminology. Sometimes it is this word asking in competitive examinations also. What is the temperature 1 by 2 to 1 by 3 to 1 by 2? The name we can call it as a warm working. Okay. So this is an important, very important objective type questions in any competitive, even some interviews also they may ask. And let us see what are the typical cold working techniques. That is cold rolling, cold forging process and cold extrusion. Similarly, when you are speaking about the hot working process, hot rolling process, hot forging process, hot extrusion process, hot drawing, the hot spinning process, this is only the fundamental definition of hot working. Yes or no? The term hot working can be defined as it is the process of heating the metal above its recrystallization temperature. We will call it as a hot working process. Below its recrystallization or at room temperature, we will call it as a cold working process. Now let us see this is a diagrammatic representation of how we can able to understand the importance of the recovery. What is meant by recovery, recrystallization and grain growth. So this is a very important. Whenever you can see in the x-axis, when the temperature, this is the temperature increases, what will happen? And similarly, the properties, mechanical, electrical, and some physical properties in the y-axis. So the first and foremost thing, first you can see the temperature at minimum low temperature, the recovery has been taken place. There is no changes, because in the recovery what will happen to relieve the internal stresses, when you apply some temperature in recovery process, in the recovery process what will happen, the internal stresses can be relieved, so that the properties can be improved, such as in this case, obviously you can see the internal residual stresses high, that have to be relieved, and hardness, ductility, it is in a middle position, and finally grain growth, that we'll discuss at the later. And this term recovery is one of the most important and the first method in a any metal forming process. This is the first and foremost method. In recovery, the temperature will be less or nominal, and where the cold worked and rework take place, we should able to relieve the internal stresses or internal residual stresses in order to improve electrical and magnetic properties. Okay, and that is why the cold working is typically done in a ductile material. This is very important. Ductile materials like aluminum, copper, nickel, these metals obviously we can prefer the cold working process. And similarly, the next second stage is called recrystallization. Again, the term recrystallization can be defined as it is the process of changes its old nuclei into new nuclei. That is called recrystallization. Changes of old nuclei. Let us observe in this case, the recovery is almost all a slight changes occur, but in the case of recrystallization, first initially a small type of molecules will be there. This will be enlarged. This will be enlarged again. It will enlarge again. It will become a small. So small will become larger and larger, and again that will be distributed, sprinkled in a small type of growths. Okay, so that is what about the term recrystallization can be defined as it is the process of changing old nuclei into new nuclei. Some old structure to a new structure formation can be occur. And finally, third important stage is grain growth. So where the grains are enlarged, new grains will be formed. Obviously, after relieving the internal residual stresses, they can improve some new grains. Obviously, their ductility, hardness can be improved at all. That is why in a metal forming process, these three terms are very, very important. That is what recovery, recrystallization, and grain growth. Now let us see the another concept. What are the important concept involved in this recovery, recrystallization, grain growth? In this diagram, the student can easily assess what happened inside the structure. If you take any metal, either ferrous or non-ferrous metal, when you heating can be done, what will happen inside? That if you take it in a microscopic structure, in a metallurgical microscope, we can see the clear understanding of the structure. So this is what the first is deformed state. Whenever by applying the pressure or load, it will deform stage, and this recovered in the sense internal some stresses and all can be relieved. We can see a small net shape type of things can be. There is a partial defect annihilation. We will call it as an annihilation, and again this will be transferred when the heat can be increased. When the temperature is increased, what will happen? Some recovered material will be partially recrystallized. That is, small will become some enlarged, and enlarged will become again enlarged. Again, it will be distributed in a again sprinkled combinations. That is what here this recovered grain boundaries will changes the moving the grain boundaries, and fully recrystallization. This old nuclei will be transformed to a new nucleus. That process we can call it as a recrystallization. The temperature at which recrystallization takes place, we will call it as a recrystallization temperature. I hope the student can understand clearly. Okay, so this the diagrammatic representation is very, very important. Initially, any type of metal forming techniques. So in the metal forming means only the two terms, hot working process, cold working process. When you wanted to apply heat, it is a hot working. Above its recrystallization temperature, we will call it as a hot working, and below its recrystallization temperature, we will call it as cold working, and the room temperature. But in between, we will call it as a warm working process. That is some specific application type of components only they can able to produce in the metal forming process. And look at the last grain growth, how the grain will be like a tree. So one small tree is there, how it will be enlarged, okay, like that growth. So like that growth will be occur, and this grain growth is nothing but a competitive coercing, that is coercing the structures. Okay, so based on this clear understanding of the structure of what you call the deformed state and recovered and partially recrystallized and fully recrystallized and grain growth, because these terminologies are very very important in a metal forming process. The first you can see the how this recovery, recrystallization, grain growth will impact on the mechanical, electrical and the properties, magnetic properties. And also another important term we will call it as an annealing time. So the term annealing, this annealing comes under the heat treatment process. Again, it is a heat treatment process. What you know that heat treatment process? So generally, when you heat the metal and you can keep it and declining, okay, heating, holding and cooling. So this is called when the metals can be heated to a required temperature and it can able to hold, and cooling. So this process we will call it as a heat treatment process. The main purpose of heat treatment is annealing, full annealing, normalizing, and what you call different type of case hardening process also will be discussed in the metallurgy chapter itself. Okay, but look at you can see the first case. This recovery means the where the strength and hardness you can see initially it is a high. Due to recovery, it slowly come down to the second and third stages. Yes or no? But only thing is recovery it is very very low ductility and formability. In the recovery, formability it is very difficult. Okay, even ductility also very less. And while heating the structures of recovery to the partial recrystallization, that partial to a full recrystallization, then grain growth, obviously the ductility of the metal can be improved, easy formability. So in a metal forming process, any type of shape, either rectangular or circular, that can be converted into small. For example, you can see the large pipes into a thin steels. So all in construction of any houses. Okay, there you can see the steel. That's what you call the steel factories and all. They can able to do the large size of rods will be converted into a hot rolling process. Hot rolling process is the process where they can able to deform in a multiple stages. First, they can able to do in a some applying the pressure. It will change one shape again. Horizontally, vertically, like that you can able to do initially like this, and you can able to deform again, you can able to do so like that. All parameters will come to will with small minimum the number of passes, minimum 20 number of passes is required to convert the large diameter to a small diameter, like steel factory and all. This hot rolling process can be widely used. So that is why in any metal forming process, the three terms are recovery, recrystallization, and grain growth are the one of the most important concept. If you understand this, any type of process like hot rolling process, hot forging process, and hot extrusion process, and hot spinning process, this can easily understand. Okay, depending upon our application, you can able to select which type of method is suitable for the particular application. Especially here, the what you call the accuracy, whatever the component to be produced, it is a mirror-like surface finish. Very good surface finish can be obtained in a metal forming process, because the material waste is also very very negligible. Very whatever amount of material you have to take in, the same amount of material can be obtained in a final component. But where in the case of metal casting process, lots of wastage can be there. So many wastes, even so many casting defects are there. Even one simple defect also which lead to be lot of problem. Again, reuse can be taken. That is why the manufacturing cost for that metal casting, it is very high. So some complicated shapes only they can able to prefer for the metal casting. Where in the case of metal forming process, here high quality. So for example, when you wanted to make a spanner and adjustable wrench and any connecting rod, not only the mechanical components, some of the automobile aeronautical components also can be go for this metal forming process. Okay, I hope the student can able to understand clearly about the recovery, recrystallization, grain growth. Now let us see the what is the important steps of recrystallization. So from the diagram also can clearly understand that if you take a some impure solid, okay, in impure solid when you dissolve in a hot solvent, how the first diagram and second diagram, when it is cool what will happen, and again when it will be filtered, and how the purified product will come out, all the filter flash filtrator will be come down. So these are the general steps involved the recrystallization. That is why the term recrystallization can be defined as the process of changing the old nuclei into a new nuclei. The transformation of old nuclei into a new nuclei, that process will call it as a recrystallization. The temperature at which the recrystallization takes place will call it as a recrystallization temperature. Look at this, some important points I have described here. Any cold worked materials is stronger or hotter, but it is a brittle. Yes or no? But when you're heating the material, typically below 1 by 2, that is 50% of the melting point, what will happen? Holding for a sufficient time, and heat treatment process, we will call it as a annealing. This is what earlier I explained. The heat treatment process means heating, holding and cooling. Okay, the material, heating the material certain temperature above the recrystallization temperature, holding for sufficient time, and it will cooling once again. That process will call it as a annealing process. Again, annealing can be divided into full annealing, paradise annealing, okay, and like different type of annealing process also will be there. And another interesting point is the main purpose of annealing is to relieve the internal stresses and improve the mechanical, electrical and magnetic properties. So this concept are very, very important in a recrystallization. Okay, and depending upon the temperature, annealing process like recovery. So whatever I have explained here, recovery means the temperature will be very low. Yes or no? That is why at low temperatures, recrystallization at high temperatures. That is the only basic difference between the recovery and recrystallization. Here the temperature will be low. That is why the ductility, formability cannot be maintained more here. That is why very less. When you do it more temperature, the inside the molecules and structures will be changes its shape and position. That is why old nucleus will become a new nuclei, and that transformation will call it as a recrystallization. It occurs the above its recrystallization temperature. Yes or no? So that is what. And during this process, what will happen? The material will tend to go some microstructural metastable state to a lower energy state. That is what annealing process. Okay, annealing means you can process of heating the metal and holding and cooling certain time. This is process we will call the annealing. The full annealing, and another important process is normalizing also is there, and some case sorting process also will study in the metallurgical concept. Okay, so this is the important concept of the recrystallization. And here some of the important terminology in recovery. So already I explained, recovery means heat temperature should be nominal, very less. So it is a process by which deformed grains can reduce their storage energy by removal of rearrangement of defects in crystals. So look at in this diagram. So there is a blue color and a red colors will be there. How they can changes here at aligned in a regular order. Some combinational, some disorder also will be formed into a regular radal, so that due to that defects, primary dislocations, so that the plastic deformation of material will act to increase the yield strength of the material. So that is why recovery, it is a process that kicks at the low temperature, but you are applying the pressure. So due to pressure, what will happen? Excess defects are annealed, and internal stresses can be relieved, and dislocations of opposite side annihilate each other, and these dislocations can be aligned to form low energy configurations, and also tilt to form a low energy configurations. That is, tilt and twist boundaries are the very important concept in this recovery process, and that is why in any cold working process, the main important improve the strength, electrical resistance, hotness increases, but only thing is ductility decreases, because there is a very low temperature. That is why ductility cannot increase, only it decreases only. Now look at this, how the tilt and twist boundaries, this is also very important. If you go a straight, it is some inclination, at an inclination of 45 degrees it will be do it, that automatically it is a regular square will changes it the some rectangle and rhombo, that is what you call rectangle to some rhombo diagonal shape. So this shape is a like a twin plane, a twin direction will be there. So this is why the term recovery takes place at the low temperature of annealing. Apparently there is no changes in microstructure, because only by applying the pressure inside will be there, only the stresses also can be removed, internal stresses can be removed, but there is no changes in microstructure. When you increase the temperature, the term that recrystallization, at the time only the microstructure has to be changed old into some new will become enlarged, and again it will come to the original law. So that's what the two important terminology: dislocation, how the random dislocations of the opposite sign come together to annihilate each other. So this is called, this is a regular, this is a random. Some inclination automatically changes its locations. So whenever the dislocation of the same sign, what will happen? Low energy configuration will occur. So edge location, screw location. Edge location is comes under the tilt boundaries. This is the tilt boundaries, whereas screw is twist boundaries. So the twist and tilt both are the very important in the recovery and recrystallization. The process will call it as a polygonization. The overall reduction in dislocation density in a small, will call it as a polygonization. So this is a simple understanding diagram of tilt and twist boundaries. Yes or no? Now let us see the what is the structural changes in the recrystallization. And the third stage is grain and grain boundaries. So from this diagram you can clearly understand how the grains, multi-crystalline material, the grain boundary and unit cell direction. The small cells will become enlarged, and that enlarge also how best it can able to change its structure in a recrystallization temperature. Okay, at the recrystallization process only it will enlarge. And this is what, if we take the two crystals, crystal 1 and crystal 2, the grain boundary will changes like this. Okay, here this two set of the circular crystals and all will become more small crystals. Again the small will enlarge, and that enlarge again, maximum enlarge, again it will become a small type of crystals. This is process, we will call it as a the recrystallization, and the enlarging of grain boundary is a grain growth, and the we'll call it as a grain growth. So that is why the term recrystallization is defined as the process in which grains of a crystal structure come in a new structure. That is what old nuclei will transform into a new nucleus. That is called the recrystallization. Look at the grain growth. So this is a third and important concept in the metal forming process. The grain growth can be discussed. It will increase the size of the grains, that is crystallites. Yes or no? So in the look at this is a deformed stage, recovery, and this partially recrystallization, small crystals are there and some large enlarging crystals are there, and this is fully recrystallized. The temperature at maximum, they can changes in the microstructural parameters. And third, it is a competitive grain growth. Whatever the shape that can be enlarged, maximum possible growth will be occur at the third stage only. So that the ductility and formability can be maximum done at the grain growth level only. Okay. So first you have to low temperature, then maximum temperature, then applying the more pressure, and also that the whatever the shape of forming and ductility also can be improved in this third stage. So already I explained the mechanical properties initially at the recovery stage. The strength and hardness will be high, and when you come to the third stage, it can be reduced. But where in the case of ductility and formability is very high at the third stage. So this internal process only will be known as this recovery, recrystallization, and grain growth. And look at this concept will be explained with a simple diagram. So like flakes formation will be occur. So these are the grains, small grains, and grain boundaries are will out of structure. Okay, so this is called the grain. Okay, grain boundary means this surrounding place. This is called grain boundary. In inner part is called grains and all. How this can be transformed into a individual crystals. So for example, you can see in the previous slide, you can see how we can able to do the two crystals and how the changes of the grain boundary into a large will become small and small will be enlarged, and again enlarged will maximum, then again distribute in a small like that form. This is also twist and tilt boundaries. How the difference between, if you go straightly, it is a some regular. Okay, amorphous means irregular. So that is why here this structural changes in grain and grain boundaries are very important. Maximum forming can be that changes the structural formation can be occur at the grain and grain boundary stages only, and the ductility also increased high. Maximum ductility property can be achieved in this grain growth. These are the some important points. The term grain growth can be defined as it is the increase in the size of the grain. That is what crystallines, how the crystallines can be increased. Compare this fully crystal and from here how it enlarged the crystallites. Okay, and obviously the term is commonly used in metallurgy, but it is used in reference to ceramics and minerals. So ferrous and non-ferrous sometimes it's difficult, but wherein the ceramics and minerals, these are very important term. The grain growth will be occur, and the grain boundary movement, how it is continuous or discontinuous, what is the direction of the motion may change suddenly. So these also important, which I have explained. Some curved boundary typically migrates toward the center of the curvature. We can see 1 2 3 4. 4 will be how the individual crystals will be transformed in a regular and twin and twisting type of can be occur, so that the changes of the grain growth will be occur in this different multi formation of the crystals. Thank you. So I hope the student can understand clearly about the recovery, recrystallization, grain growth. So this is what important concept in the metal forming process. The complete idea based on this diagram only: recovery, recrystallization, grain growth. So in the recovery, the temperature is low, but where in the case of recrystallization, maximum temperature can be achieved. But the properties in the recovery, individual internal stresses or internal residual stresses can be relieved, and so that the mechanical electrical properties can be improved. So wherever the temperature increases, the transformation of old nuclei into new nuclei can be obtained, and finally the grain growth will be occur at the last, so that only the ductility and hardness can be improved much better in this process. Okay, and this one the clear clarification of the structural changes in deformed state to recovery and partially recrystallization and fully recrystallization, grain growth with the temperatural changes. Okay, and this is the some basic steps how we'll explain with the respect of a solid solvent, and how we can able to this green and red color, and finally this purified product will come out. Okay, so that good ductility and good deformation can be occur at top level. This is what the various steps involved in the recrystallization process. Okay, so I hope the student can understand this recovery, recrystallization, grain growth. In the next class, we'll discuss some other topic. Okay, thank you, student. Thank you.
Like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.